Millionaire laughed at her, saying, "You can't become a mother." 5 years later, she returned to his second wedding with quadruplets. A beautiful story for my amazing family. God bless you all. Don't forget to like and comment. I'm here and ready. Let's begin with love. "Your womb is a graveyard," David Luca whispered against her ear, his breath cold as winter, his hand resting on her flat stomach like a judge delivering a sentence. "And I refuse to be buried alive with your failures." Amber Remy sat frozen in the dining room chair she had reupholstered herself, the chair that had taken her 3 weekends to strip and recover, because David said hiring someone was wasteful. The dinner she had spent the entire afternoon preparing had gone cold between them. Roasted chicken with herbs from the garden she tended each morning before he woke. Vegetables arranged carefully on the plate the way he preferred. Everything perfect. Everything wasted. The candles she had lit were burning down to nothing, wax pooling on the table she had polished until it gleamed. 7 years. She had given him 7 years of her life, and he was ending it like this. On their anniversary, with the same clinical precision he used for everything else. No emotion, no acknowledgement of what they had built together. Just cold efficiency. "I've already spoken to the attorneys," David continued, his voice steady, controlled, empty of anything resembling love or regret. "The paperwork is complete. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." Amber's hands trembled in her lap. She wanted to speak, to argue, to ask him how he could do this with such casual cruelty, but her throat had closed around the words like a fist tightening. She watched him instead. This man she had married at 25 with so much hope. This man she had believed would love her forever, would hold her through difficulties, would choose her every single day the way she had chosen him. "You signed the prenuptial agreement," he said, adjusting his cufflinks with the same meticulous care. He gave every detail of his appearance. "My mother insisted on it before the wedding, remember? You get nothing from this marriage. Well, almost nothing. My lawyers have been generous enough. You'll have enough for first and last month's rent somewhere appropriate to your circumstances." Appropriate. The word landed like a slap across her face, stinging in its dismissiveness. "David." Her voice came out broken, barely audible, a whisper of the confident woman she had once been. "Please, we can try again. There are other options we haven't explored. More treatments, different specialists. We could adopt. We could foster. We could—" "I don't want to adopt someone else's mistake." His eyes finally met hers, and they were empty of everything she had once believed lived there. Love, partnership, commitment, all of it gone. "I need an heir, my own biological child. The Luca name doesn't continue through adoption. My father built this empire expecting it to pass through blood. I won't be the generation that fails that legacy. I lost 3 babies. The words tore out of her, raw and bleeding. "The 3, do you remember what that felt like? Do you remember holding me in the hospital after the last one? Do you remember promising we would get through it together? I remember wasting 3 years on something that was never going to work." He stood, smoothing his suit jacket with practiced movements. "Natalia's already pregnant. We had the confirmation yesterday. 12 weeks along, healthy, everything progressing normally. Everything you couldn't manage." The room tilted sideways. Amber gripped the edge of the table to keep from sliding off her chair. Her vision blurred at the edges. "Natalia, from the marketing firm we hired last year. You've met her at several events. The charity gala, the summer party at the club." He said it like he was discussing which restaurant they should try for dinner, casual and unconcerned. "She's younger than you, 26, healthier. Her body actually functions the way it's supposed to. The way a woman's body should function." Amber stood on shaking legs, her knees barely supporting her weight. "How long? Does it matter? How long have you been with her while I was your wife?" David sighed, annoyed by the question, annoyed by her presence, annoyed by everything about her and this conversation that was keeping him from whatever came next in his carefully planned life. 8 months. Since your last miscarriage made it abundantly clear this wasn't going to work, that you weren't going to work. 8 months. While she had been grieving their 3rd lost baby, while she had been trying to heal from the emergency surgery, while she had been blaming herself for not being enough, for failing at the one thing women were supposed to do naturally. He had already moved on, already found someone new, already made plans for a future that erased her completely, as if she had never existed at all. "I loved you," she whispered, the past tense feeling like death in her mouth. "You were convenient," he corrected without hesitation. "When we met, I thought you'd be a good wife. Pleasant enough, easy to manage, good with social situations. You knew how to smile at the right people and say the right things. But none of that matters if you can't give me children. None of that matters if your body is fundamentally broken. I have a medical condition. The doctors said the endometriosis. The doctors said your body doesn't work properly." David picked up his phone, checking messages, already mentally gone from this conversation and this marriage and this woman who had failed him. "That's not my problem to solve anymore. That's not my burden to carry. I gave you 3 chances, 3 attempts. Most men wouldn't have been that patient. Most men would have left after the first failure. Patient. He thought he had been patient. The word was so absurd, Amber almost laughed. Except laughter would have turned into screaming, and she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. Not while he was still here watching. "I built this home for you," Amber said, her voice strengthening with desperation, with the need to make him see what he was destroying. "I gave up my work at the flower shop to support your career. I managed your social calendar. I entertained your colleagues and clients. I made this place a home instead of just an expensive apartment. I did everything you asked of me, everything, and I compensated you with a comfortable lifestyle." He gestured around the penthouse with a sweep of his hand. "This apartment, the clothes in your closet, the luxury of not having to work. You lived well for 7 years, better than you would have on a florist's salary. Now it's over. You should be grateful I'm not making this difficult. I could contest things. I could make your life very unpleasant. But I'm being reasonable, grateful." He wanted her to be grateful for her own destruction, for the annihilation of everything she had believed about her life and her marriage and her worth. "I can't afford anywhere on what you're offering," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "You know that. You know exactly how impossible you're making this. Then you'll need to find work. The flower shop might take you back if you ask nicely. Or there are other positions for women with your limited skills." He moved toward the bedroom, clearly finished with this conversation. "I'm sleeping at the new place tonight, the townhouse in the district. Natalia is waiting. The movers will come next week for my things. Make sure you're not here when they arrive. I don't want any dramatic scenes. David, please." She followed him, hating herself for begging, but unable to stop the words from coming. "Please don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I'll try different treatments. I'll see different doctors. He turned in the doorway, and for just a moment something flickered across his face. Not regret, not love. Just a distant acknowledgement that she was a human being suffering in front of him, and he was the cause of that suffering, and he had made his peace with that reality. You can't fix being broken. Amber, some things just don't work no matter how much effort you put into them. Some people aren't meant for certain lives. You were never meant for this life." He paused, his hand on the doorframe, looking at her one last time. "My mother was right about you from the beginning. She said you were temporary. She said you didn't have what it takes to be a Luca wife. I should have listened to her sooner. Would have saved us both considerable time and trouble." Then he left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a coffin ceiling, like the end of everything, like the death of every hope she had ever carried. Amber stood in the center of the penthouse, surrounded by everything she had carefully chosen and arranged over 7 years. The artwork she had selected from galleries, the curtains she had hung after measuring every window twice, the plants she had nurtured from small pots into thriving green life, all of it witness to her complete annihilation. She walked slowly to the bedroom and opened the closet. Half empty already. He had been moving things out gradually for weeks, maybe months, and she had been too naive to notice, too trusting to question why his side of the closet had less and less each time she looked. Her phone rang, shattering the silence. His mother's name appeared on the screen, and Amber's hand shook as she answered because some habits were too ingrained to break, even when everything else was broken. "He told me it's done." The older woman's voice came through, cold and satisfied, almost gleeful. "I'm glad he finally listened to reason, finally saw sense. You were never right for this family, dear. Surely you can see that now. Surely you understand you were always going to be temporary. We tried to tell you, but you were stubborn about it." Amber ended the call without responding. She sat on the edge of the bed where she had once believed she was loved, where she had once imagined a future filled with children and laughter and growing old together, and she felt something inside her crack and splinter. Not break cleanly, crack, like ice forming over deep water, spreading in patterns that would eventually consume everything beneath. The dinner still sat on the table when she finally moved again hours later. She looked at it, at the effort and hope it represented, at the herbs she had grown herself and the care she had taken with presentation, and she understood with brutal clarity that hope had been the cruelest thing of all. Hope had kept her trying when she should have seen the truth. Hope had blinded her to his distance and his contempt and his complete lack of love. She packed a single suitcase, not carefully, not with any thought to what she might need in whatever came next. Just grabbed clothes and shoes and the few personal items that were truly hers, that had belonged to her before the marriage. Everything else belonged to the life David had built and was now dismantling piece by piece. Everything else was contaminated by his rejection. At midnight, she walked out of the penthouse for the last time, carrying one bag and nothing else. The doorman, who had greeted her warmly for 7 years, wouldn't meet her eyes. He knew. Everyone in the building knew. She was the woman who couldn't keep her husband. The woman who failed at the one thing women were supposed to do naturally. The defective one. The night air hit her face as she stepped onto the street, autumn cold, with a promise of winter coming, and she realized she had nowhere to go. Her sister lived across the country in Oregon. Her friends had slowly disappeared during the marriage because David preferred they socialize only with people who advanced his goals, who could help his career, who mattered. She had a bank account with barely enough for a month's rent in the cheapest neighborhood she could find. She stood on the sidewalk with her single suitcase and understood that this was what complete destruction felt like. Not dramatic, not violent, not the kind of thing that made good stories. Just quiet and thorough and absolute. 7 years reduced to one bag and nowhere to go, and a future that looked like nothing but darkness. But she was still breathing, still standing, still capable of putting one foot in front of the other, even if she didn't know where those feet would take her. She didn't know yet that this moment would define everything that followed. Didn't know that survival sometimes looked like just continuing to exist when existence felt impossible. Didn't know that the woman she would become was being forged in this exact moment of absolute devastation. She only knew that David Luca had called her a graveyard, had declared her worthless, had erased her like she was nothing, and she needed to prove she was capable of growth, capable of life, capable of something more than just being the broken thing he had discarded, even if it killed her trying. Chapter 2. The descent into darkness. The apartment Amber found was in a building that smelled of old cooking oil and disappointment, of lives lived on the edge of getting by. 4th floor, no elevator. Walls so thin, she could hear her neighbors arguing about money and children and all the ordinary crises of people who had never lived in penthouses, who had never known what it felt like to have everything and then lose it all in a single conversation. The bathroom had mold in the corners that no amount of scrubbing would eliminate, black tendrils that crept back within days, no matter how hard she worked. The kitchen had 2 working burners and a refrigerator that hummed loudly enough to keep her awake at night, a constant drone that became the soundtrack to her insomnia. The bedroom window looked out onto a brick wall 3 feet away. No natural light, just perpetual dimness. It was all she could afford with what David's lawyers had given her. She spent the first week unpacking her single suitcase and trying not to think about the walk-in closet she had left behind, organized by color and season, or the marble bathroom with heated floors, or the kitchen where she had once prepared elaborate meals for David's colleagues and clients who had praised her cooking and her grace and her skill at making everyone feel welcome. None of that mattered anymore. That life belonged to someone else, someone who no longer existed, because David had decided she was defective. The flower shop where she had worked before marrying David had closed 3 years ago. The owner had retired to somewhere warm, and the space was now a coffee chain where teenagers worked for minimum wage, and no one remembered the small business that had been there before. She applied anyway, was told she was overqualified, which was apparently another way of saying too old and too desperate and too obviously broken. She applied to 20 places in 2 weeks, heard back from 3. All rejections phrased with corporate politeness that barely masked the truth. No one wanted to hire a woman whose resume showed 7 years of nothing, 7 years of being someone's wife, 7 years of unemployment that screamed dependent and unreliable. Her savings dwindled with terrifying speed. Rent, food, utilities. The basics of survival cost more than she remembered. Or maybe she had just forgotten what it felt like to count every dollar, to choose between buying vegetables or having enough for laundry detergent, to skip meals to make the money stretch further. On a Tuesday morning, when her bank account showed a balance that made her chest tighten with panic, she saw an advertisement for maintenance positions at Riverside Botanical Gardens. The pay was barely above minimum wage. The work was manual labor, outdoors in all weather, physically demanding. It required no social skills, no smiling, no pretending to be anything other than functional. She applied and was hired within a week, mostly because they were desperate for workers willing to do the hardest jobs, and she was willing to start immediately, willing to do whatever they needed. The gardens sprawled across 40 acres of cultivated beauty, maintained by a staff of 12 who worked invisibly while thousands of visitors wandered paths and took photographs and never noticed. The people making sure the flowers bloomed on schedule. Amber was assigned to the hardest physical work because she was new and because the supervisor, a weathered woman named Helen, believed in testing people, in seeing what they were made of before trusting them with anything easier: pruning dead branches, hauling compost, repairing irrigation systems, planting bulbs in frozen ground, clearing debris, everything that kept the gardens alive while remaining invisible to visitors who thought beauty just happened naturally, who never considered the labor required. The work destroyed her body in the first month. Muscles she didn't know existed ached constantly, screaming protest every morning when she forced herself out of bed. Her hands developed calluses and cuts that wouldn't quite heal because she used them again before they could recover. Her back cramped from bending and lifting. She fell into bed each night too exhausted to think, which was exactly what she needed. Thinking meant remembering. Remembering meant feeling. Feeling meant acknowledging that David's words had lodged themselves in her bones and were slowly poisoning everything from the inside out. "You look like hell," Helen said one morning, finding Amber bent over a wheelbarrow full of mulch, trying not to vomit from exhaustion and the fact that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. "When did you last eat a real meal?" "Yesterday." "Liar, your hands are shaking and you're pale as paper." "Take this." Helen shoved a granola bar into her hand with the no-nonsense manner of someone who had seen this before. "Eat it now. I don't need you collapsing and creating paperwork. I've got enough to deal with." Amber ate it mechanically, tasting nothing, the food sitting heavy in her empty stomach. "You running from something or towards something?" Helen asked, studying her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Does it matter which?" "Nope. Long as you show up on time and do the work, I don't care about your story." "Everyone here has a story. Everyone here is trying to survive something." Helen paused, seemed to consider something, then continued. "But you got that look. The one people get when they're trying to disappear, when they're hoping if they work hard enough and stay quiet enough, they'll somehow become invisible, and whatever's chasing them will give up and go away. Maybe I am trying to disappear. Can't disappear when you're surrounded by living things. They don't let you forget you exist. They need water and food and care whether you want to give it or not. Helen turned to leave, then stopped and looked back. There's a support group. Meets at the community center Tuesday nights. For women going through difficult divorces. My daughter runs it. You might benefit from not being alone with whatever's eating you alive. I'm fine. Right. That's why you're barely standing. And look like you haven't slept in weeks. And your hands shake when you think no one's watching. Helen walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Amber alone with the wheelbarrow and her thoughts. Amber didn't go to the support group. She went home to her dim apartment, ate half a can of soup that she couldn't quite finish, and sat on her second-hand couch, bought from a thrift store, until the room grew dark around her and the sounds of her neighbors' lives bled through the thin walls. Her phone rang occasionally, her sister mostly, leaving increasingly worried voicemails that Amber couldn't bring herself to answer, because what would she say? That she had failed at the most basic thing, that her body was broken in ways that made her worthless, that she was living in a moldy apartment, eating half cans of soup, and could barely afford to keep the heat on. The shame was too heavy to share, too complete, too consuming. 3 months passed in a blur of exhaustion and mechanical survival. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. She stopped looking in mirrors because she didn't recognize the woman staring back, all hollow cheeks and dead eyes and skin that had lost its luminosity. She stopped caring about her appearance beyond basic hygiene, stopped doing anything that wasn't directly required for continued existence. Helen assigned her to work in the greenhouse section, where tropical plants thrived under carefully controlled conditions. Orchids and bromeliads and ferns that required precise temperature and humidity, delicate things that needed constant attention. It was quieter there, fewer visitors, more isolation, more space to exist without being perceived. Perfect. The other workers learned not to attempt conversation beyond what was necessary for coordination. She responded with single words when required and silence when possible. They decided she was unfriendly or damaged or both, which was fine. Better than them knowing the whole truth. Better than them seeing how broken she really was. On what would have been her 8th anniversary, a date circled in her mind, if not on any calendar. Amber finished her shift and walked home slowly through streets that grew emptier and darker as she moved further from the city center. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. Sat on her couch, stared at the wall where paint was peeling in the corner, and something inside her broke. Not dramatically, not with tears or screaming or any outward sign, just a quiet internal collapse of whatever structure had been holding her upright, whatever scaffolding had been keeping her functional. She found herself walking, out of the apartment, down the stairs, through streets she barely registered, until she stood on the pedestrian bridge over the river, gripping the cold metal railing, looking down at black water moving underneath with a current that would carry away anything that fell into it. It would be easy, so easy to just stop fighting, stop pretending she was fine, stop carrying this weight that grew heavier every day until it felt like it would crush her completely. She gripped the railing tighter and leaned forward slightly, testing. The water below looked cold and final and peaceful in a way that nothing else in her life felt peaceful. You planning to jump or just thinking about it? She turned. An old man stood several feet away, walking a small dog that looked as ancient as its owner, both of them moving slowly through the night. Neither, she lied automatically. That's good, because it's cold this time of year. River's freezing. Wouldn't be quick like people think. Wouldn't be peaceful. Just cold and painful and terrifying until the cold got you or your lungs gave out. Not the romantic exit people imagine when they're standing where you're standing. The dog sniffed at her shoes with mild interest. His name is Herbert. He's 14. Had him since he was a puppy. Watched my wife die of cancer over 2 years. Watched my kids move across the country for better jobs. Watched everything I built fall apart piece by piece. You know what kept me from doing what you're thinking about? Amber said nothing, but she didn't walk away either. Curiosity. Plain simple curiosity. I wanted to see what happened next. Not because I thought it would be good. Not because I had hope. Just because I didn't know, and not knowing felt more interesting than being done. More interesting than nothing. He tugged the leash gently. Come on, Herbert. Let's go home and let this young woman make her own choices. They walked away, the old man and his ancient dog, leaving Amber alone on the bridge with her thoughts and the cold and the water below. She stood there for another hour, not because she was still seriously considering jumping, but because she needed to understand what had stopped her. And she realized it wasn't hope or strength or anything noble or admirable. It was spite. Pure, stubborn spite. David had called her a graveyard, had declared her worthless, had erased her like she was nothing, had told his mother and his colleagues and his new pregnant girlfriend that Amber was defective, and giving him the satisfaction of being right about her being broken. Giving him the satisfaction of her death proving his point. Felt like letting him win even after he had already destroyed everything else. She stepped back from the railing and walked home through the cold November night, not because she wanted to live, not because she saw any future worth having, but because she refused to let David Luca have that final victory. It wasn't much of a reason, but it was something. And sometimes something was enough to survive one more day, and then another after that. Chapter 3. The Quiet Recognition. Spring came to Riverside Botanical Gardens like a resurrection that Amber watched from outside. Separate from the renewal happening around her, everything bloomed on schedule, because that was what living things did when conditions were right, following patterns older than human pain. Daffodils pushed through frozen ground. Cherry blossoms opened in explosions of pink. The world came alive again while she remained frozen in her personal winter. She had survived 6 more months. That was all. Just survival with no particular purpose beyond. Continuing to exist because the alternative felt like giving David exactly what he wanted. Helen had stopped making comments about her appearance or health. After that morning with the granola bar, the other workers had accepted her silence as permanent, as just another quirk of someone damaged by life. The gardens flourished under her care, even as she withered, which felt appropriate somehow. She could keep other things alive, even if she couldn't manage the same for herself. The gardens hired someone new in early spring, a landscape architect, brought in to redesign the meditation spaces and sensory gardens that had fallen into disrepair after budget cuts eliminated the previous designer's position 2 years ago. His name was Josiah Vale, and Amber first saw him kneeling in the dirt beside the lavender beds that hadn't been properly maintained in months, his hands working soil with a gentleness that seemed strange for someone his size. He was a large man, solid and broad in the way of people who spent their lives doing physical work outdoors, with deep brown skin weathered by sun and wind and grey threading through his close-cropped hair. His movements were deliberate and careful, each gesture economical and purposeful. He worked quietly, didn't make small talk with the other workers during breaks, didn't try to insert himself into conversations or prove he belonged. Just focused on his designs and the plants he was installing with an attention to detail that reminded Amber of how she used to approach her own work before everything fell apart. She appreciated that. She had built her entire life around being left alone, around being invisible, around not having to explain or justify or perform for anyone. They worked near each other for 2 weeks before he spoke to her beyond the necessary coordination of tasks and schedules. She was struggling with a heavy pot of ornamental grass that needed moving from the greenhouse to the new meditation space, trying to drag it across gravel that caught the wheels, when he appeared beside her without announcement. "Let me help," he said quietly, not asking permission, not making it into a thing, just offering. They carried it together to the new location without speaking beyond left and down and there. He went back to his work. She went back to hers. That was all. The next day, she found half a sandwich wrapped in paper on the workbench where she took her breaks. No note, no explanation. But it hadn't been there before, and Josiah had been working nearby. And she had skipped breakfast again, to save money for rent that was coming due. She ate it because hunger was harder to ignore than pride. And the sandwich was good, better than what she usually managed for herself. This became a pattern over the following weeks. She would forget to eat or deliberately skip meals. Food would appear, always just enough, never excessive, never accompanied by judgment or questions or expectations of gratitude, just quietly there when she needed it. On a Friday, 3 weeks after he started, Helen assigned them both to repair the greenhouse irrigation system that had developed multiple leaks overnight, flooding one corner and threatening the orchid collection. They worked in humid silence while rain hammered the glass ceiling, creating a sound like being inside a drum. Diagnosis and repair requiring coordination, but not conversation. "I lost my wife 4 years ago," Josiah said suddenly, his voice barely audible over the rain, not looking at her but at the pipe joint he was sealing. Drunk driver hit her car on her way home from teaching night classes at the community college. She taught literature to adults who hadn't finished high school. Loved it. Said it was the most meaningful work she'd ever done. Amber's hands stilled on the pipe she was sealing, not sure how to respond or if response was expected. "They called me at midnight," he continued, adjusting a connection with careful hands. "Asked me to come identify her body at the morgue, like there was any doubt, like I wouldn't recognize the woman I'd loved since we were both 20. Like 17 years of marriage wouldn't mean I'd know her face anywhere." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I'm sorry," Amber said. The words inadequate but genuine. "I spent 2 years after that traveling. Different cities, different jobs, landscape work wherever I could find it. Thought if I kept moving, the grief couldn't catch me. Thought if I never stayed anywhere long enough to unpack, I wouldn't have to face the empty house and the life we'd planned." He adjusted another joint, testing for pressure. "But grief is patient. It waits for you to stop running. It waits for you to get tired. And then it's right there, exactly where you left it." Amber understood that more than she could articulate. The futility of running from pain that lived inside your own bones. "I came back here 6 months ago because I got tired," he said. "Tired of running. Tired of pretending I was doing anything other than avoiding the truth that Elena was gone and wasn't coming back. Thought maybe if I stopped trying to escape, I could learn to just exist alongside the pain instead of being consumed by it every single day." The rain softened to a steady rhythm, less violent but constant. "Why are you telling me this?" Amber asked, needing to understand what he wanted from her. "Because you have the same look I saw in my own mirror for years. Like you're here but not really here. Like you're going through motions but not actually living. Like you're waiting for permission to stop existing, but don't know how to ask for it." He finally met her eyes, and his held understanding rather than pity. "And I wanted you to know someone else understood what that feels like. What it costs to just keep breathing, when breathing feels like the hardest thing you've ever done." Something cracked in Amber's chest. Small, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. A fissure in the wall she had built around herself. "My husband divorced me because I couldn't have children," she heard herself say, words she hadn't spoken aloud to anyone since leaving the penthouse. Words that felt like glass coming up her throat. 3 miscarriages in 5 years. 3 failures. 3 times my body rejected the only thing he wanted from me. He told me my body was a graveyard, and he refused to be buried with my failures. Josiah's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Didn't try to fix or minimize or offer platitudes. He remarried before our divorce was even finalized. She was already pregnant with his child. Everything he wanted. Everything I couldn't give him, no matter how hard I tried. The words came faster now, pressure releasing after months of containment. "I stood on a bridge last November at 2 in the morning, looking down at the water, thinking how easy it would be to just stop, just let go, just be done with all of it, but you didn't. No. Why not?" Spite. She almost smiled at the admission, at how petty and small it sounded. "I didn't want him to be right about me being broken. Didn't want to give him the satisfaction of proving his point by destroying myself. Spite is underrated as a survival mechanism," Josiah said, and there was understanding in his voice, maybe even approval. Kept me alive through some very dark periods, too. Anger at drunk drivers, fury at the universe, rage at the unfairness of losing someone who had so much more to give. Not noble, not admirable, but effective. They finished the repair in silence, but it was different now. Shared rather than parallel. Companionable rather than merely adjacent. Over the following weeks, they began taking breaks together. Not deliberately arranged, not planned or announced, just naturally gravitating toward the same bench. The same quiet spaces where conversation was optional, but companionship was present. Where two damaged people could exist side by side, without demands or expectations. He told her about Eleanor, about their plans for children that never materialized because they kept waiting for the right time. About the graduate degree she was finishing in education when she died. About the house they were renovating together. Stripping wallpaper and refinishing floors. Planning to fill it with life and laughter and the future they were building. She told him about David. About the years of feeling insufficient and defective. About the medical appointments and treatments and specialists who kept saying, try again, keep trying, don't give up. About the hope that repeatedly shattered into smaller and smaller pieces. About the penthouse and the flower shop, and how she had somehow lost herself so completely during the marriage that she didn't recognize who she was anymore. Couldn't remember what she had wanted before David decided what she should want. My wife used to say broken things were more beautiful than perfect things. Josiah said one afternoon, while they ate lunch in the shade of an oak tree, watching visitors wander past without seeing them. She collected antique pottery, loved the pieces with cracked glazes and repaired chips and visible history. Said they told stories that perfect things couldn't tell. That damage was just proof that something had survived. Did you believe her? Not until after she was gone. Not until I became a broken thing myself and had to decide if that meant I was worthless or just changed. If I was ruined or just different than I'd been before. He was quiet for a moment, watching clouds move across the sky. I'm still deciding. Some days I think I'm irreparably damaged. Other days, I think maybe damage is just part of being human. Maybe everyone's broken and some of us are just more honest about it. Me too, Amber admitted, surprised to hear herself say it out loud. Still deciding. Something shifted between them that afternoon under the oak tree. An understanding that they were both works in progress, both learning to exist in bodies and minds that felt irreparably damaged. Both trying to figure out if healing was even possible or if survival was the best they could hope for. The highest achievement they could manage. It wasn't romance. It wasn't attraction in any conventional sense. It was recognition. Two broken things, acknowledging each other's brokenness without trying to fix or save or transform. And sometimes recognition was enough to make existence feel slightly less impossible. Slightly more bearable. Just barely manageable instead of completely overwhelming. Chapter 4. The Terrifying Possibility. Summer turned the gardens into something excessive and overwhelming. Everything growing too fast, blooming too intensely, requiring constant maintenance to prevent nature from reclaiming the carefully cultivated spaces people paid to visit. Ember and Josiah worked together more often now, Helen pairing them for projects that required two people, and neither of them objected. The work felt easier with company, with someone who understood silence, with someone who didn't demand explanations or performance. They started meeting outside of work. Small things at first, nothing that looked like dating or romance or anything requiring definition. Coffee before their shifts at a place that served decent brew and didn't try to make conversation. Walks through the gardens after closing when the gates locked and they had the paths to themselves. Just quiet movement through beauty they had helped maintain. Dinners at cheap restaurants where the food was mediocre but the company made it bearable. Where they could sit across from each other and talk or not talk as the mood required. Amber found herself thinking about him during the day when they weren't working together. Looking forward to seeing him. Missing his presence on his days off. Feeling disappointed when their schedules didn't align. She didn't have a name for what was happening. and she was afraid to examine it too closely because naming things made them real, and real things could be lost, and she couldn't survive losing anything else. Josiah seemed equally hesitant. He maintained careful distance even as they grew closer emotionally, sharing more and more pieces of their damaged histories. Never touched her beyond necessary coordination during work. Never suggested anything that looked explicitly like dating. Never used words like relationship or future. Just existed beside her in a way that felt safe and steady and unlike anything she had experienced with David, who had always been managing and directing and controlling. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said one evening in late August while they sat in his truck watching the sunset over the river. The sky turning impossible colors. "And it terrifies me more than anything has terrified me since Elena died." Amber's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I didn't think this would happen again," he continued, his hands gripping the steering wheel like he needed something solid to hold, like he might float away without an anchor. "After Elena died, I accepted that was it. One great love. One chance, done, finished, and I made peace with that reality. Built a life around that acceptance. Convinced myself I was okay with being alone for whatever time I had left. But then you showed up looking like I felt inside, and something in me recognized something in you, and now I don't know what to do with these feelings." His voice cracked with emotion barely contained. "Because loving someone means risking loss, and I barely survived losing Elena. I don't know if I can survive that kind of devastation again. Don't know if I'm strong enough or brave enough or stupid enough to risk it." Amber understood completely. Love was vulnerability. Vulnerability was risk. Risk was potential devastation. Opening yourself to happiness meant opening yourself to the possibility of having that happiness violently removed. "What do you want?" she asked quietly, her own voice unsteady. "I want to be brave enough to try." He finally looked at her, and she saw tears in his eyes, saw the fear and hope warring on his face. "I want to choose you even though it terrifies me. I want to build something real, even though I know intimately how fast real things can be destroyed by circumstances beyond anyone's control. I want to marry you." The last sentence landed between them like something precious and fragile, something that could shatter if either of them moved wrong. "Josiah, wait, let me finish, please." He turned in his seat to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. "I'm not offering you some perfect healed version of myself. I'm not pretending I'm okay or whole or ready for this in any conventional sense. I still wake up at 3 in the morning from nightmares about the accident. I still have days where getting out of bed feels impossible and I have to force myself through every basic task. I still carry Elena with me every single day and probably always will. You'd be choosing someone damaged, someone who might never be completely whole, someone who comes with permanent scars and ongoing grief. I'm not exactly whole either," she said, her own voice breaking. "I know. That's why this might actually work. Because we both understand what it costs to survive trauma. We both know hope is dangerous, and promises can be broken through no fault of anyone involved. We both know that love doesn't conquer everything, and sometimes the universe just destroys what you've built for absolutely no reason." He took a shaky breath, composing himself. "I'm asking you to marry me while being completely honest about how broken I am. And I need you to say yes, knowing that I come with permanent damage that won't ever fully heal. Or say no if that's too much. But whatever you choose, I needed you to know what I feel. Needed you to know you're not alone in this." Amber felt tears sliding down her face, hot against her skin, surprising in their suddenness. Not from sadness or fear, from the overwhelming recognition that someone was offering her truth instead of performance. Damage instead of pretense, reality instead of fantasy, authentic instead of perfect. "I'm infertile," she said, needing him to hear it again, needing to make absolutely certain he understood. The doctors were clear. 3 miscarriages. Significant scarring. Adenomyosis that creates an inhospitable environment for pregnancy. Even with treatment, even with surgery, the chances of successful pregnancy are nearly impossible. I might never give you children. I heard you the first time you told me. I might never be able to give you a family. I heard that too. And I'm telling you it doesn't matter. That's not why I want to marry you. Then why would you want to marry me? Why would you choose someone so fundamentally broken? Because I love you. Not your uterus, not your potential for reproduction, not what you might give me someday. You, the actual person sitting next to me. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his rough and calloused, hers the same. The woman who survived cruelty that would have destroyed most people. The woman who stood on a bridge and chose spite over surrender when it would have been so much easier to just let go. The woman who shows up every day and tends living things with such care, even while feeling dead inside. That woman, her I want to marry. Her I choose. I don't know how to be someone's wife again, she admitted, the fear of repeating past mistakes overwhelming. David destroyed something fundamental in me, made me believe I was only valuable if I could produce children, made me believe my entire worth was tied to my reproductive capacity. I don't know if I can trust that you won't eventually resent me the same way. Don't know if I can survive that happening again. Then we'll figure it out together. Both of us damaged, both of us scared, both of us trying, despite having every logical reason not to risk it. He squeezed her hand gently. Amber, I'm asking you to marry me. Not because I'm perfect or because you're healed or because either of us knows what we're doing. Marry me because we're both still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing each other despite every reason not to risk our hearts again. She looked at their joined hands, hers scarred from garden work and years of clawing her way through survival, his rough with calluses from creating beauty out of dirt and pain. Both of them marked by what they'd survived. Yes, she whispered, the word barely audible. Yes, I'll marry you. He pulled her across the seat and held her while she cried, and it was the first time since David had destroyed her that she believed she might be capable of happiness again. Not perfect happiness unmarred by fear, not happiness that pretended damage didn't exist, but real happiness that acknowledged the scars and chose to try anyway. The kind that came from choosing deliberately despite risk, from being brave enough to be vulnerable again, even knowing exactly how badly it could end. They married in September at the gardens where they had both found each other. Small ceremony with only Helen and Josiah's mother and sister present, because neither of them wanted performance or spectacle, just witnesses to their choice. The officiant kept it simple and honest. They wrote their own vows, promising not forever, because forever was a lie the universe could violate at any moment, but promising today, promising honesty, promising to choose each other as long as choice remained possible. When they exchanged rings, simple bands neither expensive nor flashy, Amber felt something settle in her chest that had been displaced since David's cruelty. Not the frantic, desperate love she had felt for David that had required constant validation. Something quieter, deeper, more sustainable, more real. They bought a small house on the edge of town with a wild backyard that Josiah immediately began transforming with native plants and meandering paths. And Amber felt for the first time since the divorce that she had a home, rather than just a place to sleep and hide from the world. We'll build something good here, Josiah said on their wedding night. Both of them sitting in their new backyard, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. I don't know what shape it takes. I don't know if it includes children or stays just us. I don't know if we'll have 5 years or 50, but we'll build it together with honesty and care. And that's enough for me. You're enough for me exactly as you are. Amber leaned against his shoulder and believed him, believed in possibility for the first time in years, not because she thought everything would be perfect, but because imperfect with him felt more real than perfect had ever felt with David, and real was enough, more than enough, everything she needed. Chapter 5. The Impossible Gift. 4 months into their marriage, Amber woke at dawn with nausea so violent she barely made it to the bathroom. She sat on the cold tile floor afterward and felt dread settle into her bones with a weight that made her want to hide from reality. She knew this feeling, had experienced it 3 times before. The particular nausea that preceded the hope that preceded the devastating loss. No, not again. She couldn't survive another miscarriage, couldn't endure Josiah's comfort while her body betrayed her again, couldn't live through the hope to devastation cycle that had nearly destroyed her with David. She bought a pregnancy test on her way to work, took it in the staff bathroom during lunch, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. Positive. She stared at the result and felt nothing but grief and terror. This was supposed to be impossible. The doctors had been clear that her uterus was inhospitable to life. Years of trying with David, 3 losses, the adenomyosis. Everything in her medical history pointed to this being impossible. She hid the test in her locker and said nothing to Josiah, or the next day, or the next week, while the nausea intensified. She waited for the cramping, for the bleeding, for the inevitable confirmation that her body would reject this pregnancy like it had rejected every other attempt. But days passed with nothing but increasing nausea. Then 2 weeks with her body stubbornly holding on. The exhaustion became overwhelming, and still her body held on to this impossible thing with a tenacity that felt almost aggressive. "You're pregnant," Helen said one morning, finding Amber behind the greenhouse trying not to vomit. "How far along?" "I don't know." "Does Josiah know?" "No, because I'm going to lose it." Amber's voice cracked. "I always lose them. 3 times with David. And telling Josiah means watching him hurt when it happens, and I can't do that to him." Helen sat beside her. "Or maybe your body knows something the doctors don't. Maybe being with someone who makes you feel safe changed something fundamental. Or maybe I get to hope and then watch it die inside. Me again." Amber wiped her eyes. "I barely survived the last 3 losses, Helen. This one will kill me. But hiding it from your husband isn't protecting either of you. It's making you face this alone when you have someone who actually loves you," Amber told Josiah that night, placing the pregnancy test on the table between them. His face transformed from confusion to joy to fear as he processed what he was seeing. "You're pregnant," he whispered. "Yes, but I'm going to lose it. The doctors said my chances of carrying to term are nearly impossible. Everything points to this ending badly. The doctors said it was unlikely, not impossible." He pulled her close. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks you've been carrying this alone. I couldn't watch you hope and then watch you hurt when my body fails again." "Our body," he corrected firmly. "If you're pregnant, we're pregnant. We face this together. Whatever happens. That's what choosing each other means." The first ultrasound appointment felt like walking toward execution. When the technician began, Amber closed her eyes tightly because she could not bear to see the empty space that would confirm her body's inadequacy. "Mrs. Vale." The technician's voice was strained. "I need to get the doctor." Amber's eyes opened, terror flooding through her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just need the doctor to confirm what I'm seeing." The doctor came in, looked at the screen, and made a sound of disbelief. She adjusted the wand, checked from different angles. "Mrs. Vale, Mr. Vale." She turned the monitor toward them. "You're pregnant with quadruplets. 4 babies, 4 separate heartbeats, all developing normally, quadruplets." Amber stared at the screen where 4 distinct shapes pulsed with 4 separate rhythms. 4 impossible lives existing where everyone had said life couldn't exist. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Clearly not," the doctor said. "This is extraordinarily rare, especially given your history. I need your complete medical file." The specialist they were referred to reviewed every document from Amber's medical history, ordered new tests, examined her thoroughly. "You were misdiagnosed," the specialist said finally. "Your previous doctors identified endometriosis, but what you actually have is adenomyosis. Different condition. And there's a relatively simple procedure that should have been offered years ago. But I didn't have any procedure." Amber said, "No, but adenomyosis is sometimes significantly aggravated by chronic stress. When stress levels decrease significantly, the body can regulate itself enough that the condition quiets considerably. The specialist looked at her carefully. Your records indicate you attempted pregnancy in an extremely stressful marriage. Is that accurate? Yes, very accurate. And your current marriage is different? Completely different. That may be significant. Additionally, are there twins in your family, Mr. Vale? I'm a fraternal twin, Josiah said. My mother was also a twin. That explains the hyperovulation. Combined with your wife's age and reduced stress allowing her adenomyosis to quiet, you created a perfect storm of fertility. The specialist smiled slightly. Spontaneous quadruplets are extraordinarily rare. In someone with your history, Mrs. Vale, it's remarkable. But it's medically explainable. We can treat this as high risk, but manageable. Amber started crying, relief and terror mixing until she couldn't separate them. The pregnancy will be extremely high risk, the specialist continued. Quadruplets almost always require extended bed rest. You'll need intensive monitoring. There's significant risk of premature labor, preeclampsia, but all 4 babies are currently developing normally. If we can get you to 32 weeks, they'll have excellent survival chances. They drove home in stunned silence. 4 babies, Josiah said finally. We're going to have 4 babies. A whole family in one pregnancy? If I can carry them that long, your body is stronger than anyone gave you credit for. You survived David's cruelty. You survived standing on that bridge. You can do this. He turned to face her. We're going to do this together, whatever it takes. That night, lying in bed with Josiah's hand splayed across her stomach, where 4 lives somehow fit, Amber let herself believe something she had thought impossible for years. She let herself hope, not cautiously, but recklessly and completely. 4 lives. 4 chances. 4 reasons to believe her body was capable of miracles instead of just graveyards. 4 reasons to believe David Luca had been wrong about everything. Chapter 6. The Cruel Invitation. The pregnancy consumed everything with an intensity that left no room for anything else. Amber stopped working at 12 weeks when the nausea became so debilitating she couldn't stand upright for more than an hour. Helen hugged her goodbye, told her to focus on those babies, promised her position would be waiting. At 13 weeks, she was hospitalized for hyperemesis gravidarum, so severe she couldn't keep down water. 5 days of IV fluids while Josiah slept beside her bed, holding her hair back when she vomited, reading to her when she was too weak to do anything but listen. At 16 weeks, baby C. Willow showed signs of growth restriction on the ultrasound. 2 weeks of modified bed rest, while doctors monitored constantly, adjusting medications until Willow's growth normalized. At 20 weeks, Amber's cervix began shortening, a sign of potential incompetence that could lead to premature labor. Full bed rest, complete and total. The doctor was clear: stay horizontal or risk losing all 4 babies before viability. Josiah transformed their bedroom into command center, moved his work laptop in, conducting meetings via video, brought meals on trays, read to her for hours, massaged her swollen feet without complaint. Never once suggested this was too hard or more than he'd signed up for. They named the babies during those long bedridden days. River for water that carved canyons through stone with patience. Sage for the plant that purified and healed. Willow for the tree that bent but never broke. Forest for the ecosystem that thrived through interconnection. We're going to make it, Josiah said one night, his hand on her enormous belly where movement was constant now. I can feel it. We're going to meet these babies and teach them about gardens and survival and choosing to be brave. What if something goes wrong? Then we face it together. But I don't think anything will go wrong. Your body has been waiting for the right conditions. You're safe. You're loved. You're not being judged. And your body knows the difference. At 28 weeks, Amber developed preeclampsia, her blood pressure spiking dangerously. Immediate hospitalization. Medications to control the pressure. Steroids to mature the baby's lungs. The doctors began discussing delivery timelines, preparing them for the likelihood that 32 weeks was the best they could expect. She spent every moment after that diagnosis talking to the lives inside her, begging them to hold on just a little longer, promising them a world worth being born into. The babies arrived at 32 weeks exactly through emergency cesarean when Amber's blood pressure reached stroke risk levels. She was barely conscious through the procedure, hearing crying but unable to quite connect it to reality. River was born first. 3 pounds 2 ounces, crying immediately, angry and fighting. Then Sage at 3 pounds even, quiet but observant. Then Willow at 2 pounds 14 ounces, the smallest but fierce. Finally Forrest at 2 pounds 10 ounces, struggling slightly but breathing, living here. 4 babies. 4 cries filling the operating room. 4 impossibilities made flesh. When Josiah wheeled her to the NICU 6 hours later, Amber saw her 4 babies for the first time. Each in their own incubator, covered in wires and tubes, impossibly tiny but alive and fighting. She wept until the nurses worried she was hemorrhaging emotionally. "They're here," she kept saying. "They're actually here. They're real." 8 weeks in the NICU followed, learning to hold babies small enough to fit in one hand. Kangaroo care, celebrating every ounce gained, every milestone reached. Terror and hope existing simultaneously every single day. When all 4 babies were finally cleared for discharge, Josiah's family descended to help. His sister had transformed the nursery. His mother organized meal trains. Their house became beautiful, overwhelming chaos. 4 babies needing feeding every 3 hours. 4 babies with 4 different personalities already emerging. River bold and vocal, Sage observant and quiet. Willow social already. Forrest stubborn. Amber had never been happier, never felt more purposeful. Never understood so completely that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The quadruplets were 4 months old when the envelope arrived. Heavy cream paper with expensive calligraphy. David Lucas family crest embossed in gold. An invitation to his wedding to Natalia Frost at the Luca estate. Inside, a handwritten note in David's distinctive script. "I'm told through mutual acquaintances that you've remarried and are living in that little house on Maple Street. I wanted you to see what a successful marriage looks like, what a real family looks like. Natalia is pregnant with my son, due in 4 months. I thought you should witness the family you could never give me, so you can finally understand why some women simply aren't meant to be mothers. Consider this closure for both of us." Josiah found Amber at 2 in the morning in the nursery. River sleeping against her chest, the crumpled invitation in her fist. He read the note, and his jaw tightened with rage. "We're not going. We're burning this and forgetting he exists." "No," Amber said quietly. "I need to go. Why would you give him that power? I'm not giving him anything. I'm taking something back." She looked up at Josiah. "He told me I was a graveyard, that I would never be a mother, that I was defective and worthless. I need him to see that every word was a lie. I need to stand in front of him with our children and prove his judgment was worthless. You don't need to prove anything to him, not to him. To myself." She adjusted River carefully. "I need to close that chapter completely, and I can't do that until I face him one last time and show him he was wrong about everything, that his cruelty didn't destroy me permanently." Josiah understood. He had needed similar closure after Elena's death. Standing in court during the drunk driver's sentencing, finally releasing the rage. "Then we go together," he said, "and we show him exactly what he lost when he threw you away." They spent the next weeks preparing, arranging for Josiah's family to watch the babies, packing the specialized 4-seat stroller, choosing Amber's outfit carefully, something elegant that spoke of quiet confidence without desperation. The night before the wedding, Amber couldn't sleep despite exhaustion. Josiah held her in the darkness while she trembled. "No matter what happens tomorrow, you're already victorious. You survived. You thrived. You built a family with someone who values you beyond biology. Nothing he says can change that truth." Amber closed eyes and believed him. Tomorrow she would face the man who had tried to destroy her, and she would do it, surrounded by proof that destruction had failed. Chapter 7. The Return. The morning arrived crystalline and perfect. Early September weather that felt like a gift. Amber dressed slowly in the deep blue dress that flowed around her post-pregnancy body, elegant without trying too hard. She looked in the mirror and saw someone strong and purposeful, someone who had survived the unsurvivable. Josiah loaded the stroller and diaper bag with methodical care, his tension radiating like heat despite his steady movements. The drive took 2 hours through countryside that gradually shifted from modest to sprawling estates. They didn't talk much. Everything had already been said. This was ritual now, closure, the final act of a story that had begun 7 years ago with cruelty and was ending today with vindication. The quadruplets slept for most of the drive, their synchronized breathing calming. They woke 15 minutes from the estate, alert and curious. As if they sensed the importance of this moment, Amber nursed them quickly in a gas station parking lot, Josiah standing guard, his presence making her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt during her entire first marriage. When they pulled up to the Luca estate, Amber felt nothing for the opulence that had once intimidated her. The manicured lawns, the excessive architecture, all of it spoke only of David's need to display success. "You ready?" Josiah asked. Yes, they had timed their arrival perfectly. The ceremony was already underway. David at the altar, 300 guests seated in white chairs. The string quartet played something forgettable, everything choreographed and controlled. Amber pushed the stroller herself, refusing Josiah's offer, needing to move forward under her own power. The ceremony was in the same garden where she and David had married 7 years ago. She walked slowly down the side path parallel to the guests, gravel crunching under the wheels. Every eye turned toward her. The ripple of recognition and shock moved through the crowd like a physical wave. Whispers erupted. At the altar, David stood beside Natalia, both dressed perfectly. His posture was confident until he saw Amber. His face transformed in real time. Joy dissolved into shock, then devastation. Color drained from his features as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. Not one baby, four. 4 separate lives in a quad stroller that should not exist according to every medical opinion he had cited. During their divorce, his mouth fell open. His entire body froze mid-vow. The officiant had to repeat the question twice, then a third time, before David managed to tear his eyes away and attempt to continue, his voice barely audible. Natalia stopped speaking mid-sentence. She followed David's gaze, her expression shifting from bridal radiance to fury as she realized she had lost her groom's complete attention. Amber found a seat in the back row, positioned the stroller precisely so David had an unobstructed view, and settled with serene composure. She adjusted the canopy, pulled out a bottle for Willow, who was starting to fuss, appeared completely at ease. The ceremony tried to continue, but it was disaster barely contained by social convention. David's responses were nearly inaudible, his eyes constantly drifting back to Amber. Natalia's voice grew increasingly shrill, trying to reclaim her moment. When she said, "I do," her voice was sharp, with barely suppressed rage. When the officiant asked David, there was a pause so long guests shifted uncomfortably. Finally, David whispered something that might have been affirmation. The kiss was perfunctory and cold. The applause polite rather than enthusiastic, everyone aware they had witnessed something deeply uncomfortable. During cocktail hour, David tried 3 times to approach Amber. Each time Josiah intercepted smoothly, positioning himself like an immovable wall. The third time, Josiah leaned close and said something that made David step back as if physically pushed, his face pale. But at the reception, when Josiah stepped away to change Sage's diaper, David finally cornered his ex-wife near the garden's edge, where white lights hung like captive stars. "Amber," his voice cracked on her name. "Please, just 5 minutes." She turned to face him, and he looked like a man confronting the ruins of everything he had believed. "Are they mine?" he asked desperately. "Were you pregnant when we divorced?" "No." "Then how?" "The doctors said you couldn't." "The doctors were wrong. You were wrong. Your entire understanding of my worth was wrong." Her voice was calm, devastating in its simplicity. They're Josiah's children, all four, conceived and born years after you threw me away. That's impossible. Clearly not. She gestured toward the stroller. David's face crumbled. I made a terrible mistake. I see that now. Natalia isn't who I thought. The pregnancy was a lie. She's cruel and only wants my money. I was wrong about everything. Yes, you were. I still love you, he choked out, tears starting. I never stopped. I should have fought for us. Should have supported you. Should have been a real partner. Should have treated me like a human being instead of defective merchandise. Amber finished. Should have attended appointments. Should have held me when I miscarried instead of blaming me. Yes, all of that. I'm sorry. Before she could respond, Natalia appeared, having tracked David with the vigilance of someone who recognized threat. She inserted herself between them, her voice cutting. What are you doing? Why are you crying? Why are you talking to your pathetic ex-wife instead of celebrating our wedding? She looked at Amber with undisguised hatred. You showed up with your bastard children to ruin my day. You're desperate and sad and obviously still in love with him. But he's mine now. You had your chance and failed. Her voice rose loud enough that nearby guests stopped pretending not to watch. He chose me. I'm pregnant with his child. David tried to calm her but made everything worse. The scene escalated. Natalia screaming. David trying to explain. Server's frozen. The string quartet trailing off into silence. Then River stopped breathing. His face turned blue, body going rigid. Amber moved with practiced calm, immediately lifting him, turning him face down on her forearm, performing back blows with precise pressure. Josiah materialized beside her instantly, phone already out. Both of them working with seamless coordination, learned through months of NICU training. Within 15 seconds, River gasped and began breathing again, crying with outraged wails. The surrounding guests stood frozen, horrified witnesses to a crisis they didn't understand. David watched this unfold and understood what partnership actually looked like, what real love required, what he had thrown away. He had never attended Amber's medical appointments, had viewed her crises as inconveniences, had never learned to support her through difficulty. Watching them move in perfect synchronization, he understood he hadn't just lost a wife. He'd lost a partner. Natalia watched the entire garden's attention focus on Amber and her babies, on David's face as he stared at his ex-wife with naked longing. Then something inside her snapped. She grabbed David's arm hard enough to bruise. Choose right now. Me or your past. David looked at his new bride and saw not a partner but a transaction. He looked back at Amber, nursing River while Josiah talked quietly to the other babies. David understood he had already chosen, years ago when he prioritized dynasty over devotion. The choice had been made, and he had chosen wrong. Natalia saw the truth on David's face. She removed her veil with shaking hands, her voice rising to carry across the garden. I can't marry a man who's still in love with someone else. David Luca is emotionally unavailable and clearly still attached to his past. This marriage is over. She told the assembled guests there would be no marriage, that she was leaving, that David could keep his ring and his pathetic obsession. Then she walked out, wedding dress trailing, leaving David standing alone in front of 300 guests who had just witnessed the most spectacular wedding disaster in their collective memory. The scene would be filmed, would spread through their social circles, would be discussed for years. Amber didn't say a word. She just looked at David one final time with something worse than anger, indifference. Then she packed up the stroller and left with Josiah, while David stood frozen in the ruins of his own making. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The weeks following the wedding brought David to his knees in ways he had never imagined possible. Natalia's very public rejection became immediate social media fodder, guests having filmed portions of the disaster. Within 3 days, his name was trending in their city's social circles, memes created from screenshots. David becoming that guy too obsessed with his ex-wife to commit to his new bride. The consequences were swift and brutal. Investors began quietly withdrawing from deals, citing concerns about his judgment and emotional stability. Partners in major projects requested buyouts, afraid that David's crumbling reputation would taint their ventures. His attorney received 3 formal dissolution requests in 1 week. His mother called and delivered a 40-minute lecture about disgrace and poor decisions and failing the family name. She told him his father would be ashamed that he had humiliated the Luca name. He tried to focus on salvaging what remained, on damage control, on rebuilding relationships. But he found himself staring at contracts without processing words, sitting in meetings without hearing proposals, driving past Amber's neighborhood, hoping for glimpses that proved she existed beyond his memories. His therapist told him bluntly that he was experiencing a reckoning with his own capacity for cruelty, that he had spent years constructing elaborate justifications, and now reality was forcing him to confront truth without the comfort of self-deception. "You told yourself she was the problem," his therapist said. "You constructed an entire narrative where you were reasonable and she was defective. But narratives built on lies eventually collapse, and yours collapsed in front of 300 witnesses. Meanwhile, Natalia had her own reckoning. The disaster had freed her from a marriage she had entered for transactional reasons, and the relief was overwhelming even as the humiliation burned. She spent 2 weeks hiding before finally calling the one person who might understand, Amber. She left a voicemail at 11 at night, her voice breaking. "I know you have no reason to listen, but I need to tell you the truth. I'm not pregnant. I was never pregnant. I lied to trap David because I'm infertile myself and desperately wanted children and thought his money could solve that problem through treatments. I can't afford a loan," she told Amber about the ectopic pregnancy that destroyed one fallopian tube, about the endometriosis that ravaged the other, about 3 failed cycles that emptied her savings. She told Amber about the shame of being a woman who couldn't do the one thing women were supposed to do naturally. "Seeing you at the wedding with those 4 babies broke something in me," Natalia admitted through tears. "Because it was everything I wanted and couldn't have. I became someone I despise, and I'm sorry for every cruel thing I said. You didn't deserve that." Amber listened to the voicemail 3 times, sitting in her car after a pediatrician appointment. She felt something complex, compassion mixed with memory of pain. She recognized Natalia's desperation because she had lived it. She called back. They met for coffee at a place far from both their neighborhoods. The conversation was raw and honest. Natalia apologized without excuses, admitting that seeing Amber happy had triggered every insecurity she carried. Amber told Natalia her full story. About the misdiagnosis, about the corrected diagnosis, about the specialist who said stress and trauma could prevent pregnancy even when the body was technically capable, about how finding safety with Josiah had allowed her body to heal. "I believe my infertility during my marriage to David was my body protecting me," Amber said, refusing to bring children into a toxic environment. "The quadruplets only became possible because I found a partner who made me feel safe." She offered Natalia the name of her specialist, told her about support groups, and most importantly, told her she didn't have to figure this out alone. Natalia left that coffee shop with something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not hope for pregnancy necessarily, but hope that she could become a person she respected. She and Amber maintained occasional contact. 2 women who had both been nearly destroyed by the same man's inability to see worth beyond biology. David, learning about Amber and Natalia's coffee meeting, felt jealousy and exclusion. His ex-wife and his failed bride had found common ground without him, had created connection through shared survival of his cruelty, and he was excluded from the healing they were pursuing. His business continued its steady erosion. He tried to rebuild his reputation through charitable donations to infertility research and women's health initiatives. But everyone saw through the performance. His mother told him he had become his father, had repeated the exact pattern of cruelty that had destroyed their family. She told him something she had never revealed, that his father had divorced her not because she couldn't have more children, but because he viewed her as defective for the complications that ended her fertility. "Watching you treat Amber the same way broke my heart," she admitted. "I was cruel to her because seeing your marriage reminded me of my own pain. I've apologized to her in writing." She acknowledged it but didn't respond. "And I don't blame her. She told David he needed to understand he might never get the forgiveness he wanted, that some damage was permanent, that the best he could hope for was to become a better person going forward." David sat with that knowledge and understood that his cruelty had roots deeper than his conscious choices, that he had inherited patterns he never questioned. It required fundamental transformation, and he didn't know if he was capable of that kind of change, but for the first time he was willing to try. Not because he thought it would win Amber back, but because living with who he had become felt worse than the work of becoming someone different. Chapter 9. The Unraveling. The months after the wedding disaster brought revelations that continued to rewrite everything David thought he understood. The first came from his physician during a routine physical, when blood work flagged abnormalities requiring additional testing. Low sperm count, significantly below normal ranges, motility issues that would make natural conception extremely difficult. "How long has this been the case?" David asked, his voice hollow. The specialist looked at his results. "Impossible to say definitively without historical data, but given the severity and your age, this is likely long-standing, possibly congenital. You've likely always had some degree of subfertility, years, possibly always." He had blamed Amber for their infertility, had called her defective, had destroyed their marriage over her supposed inadequacy. And the entire time, he might have been the actual problem. The second revelation came from Natalia's attorney 3 months later, with formal annulment papers based on fraud. She claimed David had misrepresented his emotional availability and had brought her to a wedding specifically to humiliate her. The proceedings were vicious and public. Natalia ensured everyone knew David was emotionally damaged, still in love with Amber, weak for letting an ex-wife ruin their wedding. She gave interviews. She posted carefully worded statements. She made sure everyone knew she was the victim. The financial settlement was substantial. She walked away with enough money to pursue every fertility treatment twice over, telling reporters she was grateful to escape before wasting more time. David's reputation collapsed completely. Investors who had once competed for his attention now avoided his calls. Colleagues treated him with barely concealed pity or contempt. His therapist told him that trying to buy redemption through donations didn't work, because real change required internal transformation. "You need to understand where your cruelty came from," she said. "Not to excuse it, but to break the pattern." David began examining his childhood with brutal honesty. His father's cold dismissal of his mother, the way his father had remarried quickly and had 3 more children, essentially replacing their family. The message David had internalized, that a woman's value was tied to reproductive capacity. He had never questioned these beliefs, had absorbed them so completely they became his foundation. He tried reaching out to Amber multiple times. Calls to voicemail, emails that bounced back, even a letter returned unopened with "refused" written across the envelope. She had meant what she said about closure. She was done, finished. He was excluded from her life completely and permanently, and he had to accept that some consequences were permanent, some damage irreversible, some chances given only once. Meanwhile, Amber's life continued in beautiful chaos. River, sage, willow, and forest, developing into distinct personalities. Amber opening her floral design studio, starting small and gradually expanding as word spread. Josiah's landscape architecture flourishing through reputation. They weren't wealthy by David's standards, but they were comfortable and happy and building something sustainable. On the quadruplet's 2nd birthday, they threw a small party in their backyard. Family only. Josiah's sister brought cake. His mother organized games. Amber's sister flew in from Oregon. It was during this celebration, with children's laughter filling the garden, that David appeared at their gate. Josiah saw him first and moved to block the entrance. But Amber touched his arm and walked to the gate herself. David looked hollowed out, aged beyond the years that had passed. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said before she could speak. "I don't expect anything. I just need you to know that I understand now. What I destroyed, what I lost, what I did to you. I already know you understand," Amber said calmly. "Natalia left me, annulled the marriage. My reputation is destroyed. My business is failing, and I understand now that I deserved all of it." Tears ran down his face. "But I needed to tell you something else. Something I learned after the wedding." "What?" "I'm subfertile. Always have been. Low sperm count and motility issues that would have made it nearly impossible to conceive naturally with anyone." His voice broke. "I blamed you for our infertility, called you defective, destroyed our marriage over your supposed failure. And the entire time, I might have been the actual problem." Amber felt something shift in her chest, but not sympathy, just recognition of how completely his certainty had been wrong. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "For everything. For the cruelty. For the blame. For destroying you when I should have supported you. For being exactly like my father even though I swore I never would be. I forgave you months ago," Amber said quietly. "Not because you deserved it, but because carrying anger toward you became a burden I no longer wanted. Forgiveness is about my peace, not your redemption. Thank you. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You can never be part of my life or my family's life. This conversation is our final closure. There will be no further contact. I accept that. I hope you find a way to become better," Amber continued. "To learn from your cruelty. To break the patterns your father taught you." She told him what her therapist had helped her understand. That breaking generational patterns required becoming conscious of them. That he didn't need to erase his father's influence, but rather choose differently every day. "I'm going to give my children a letter someday," she said, "about how they came from impossibility, about how other people's verdicts on your worth are often wrong. I wanted you to know that your cruelty led me somewhere better." David left her gate with tears streaming, and Amber watched him walk away, knowing she would never see him again. Feeling the last chain of their shared history finally break and dissolve, she closed the gate and walked back to her family, to where Josiah stood ready to intervene if needed, to where 4 children played with chaotic joy, and she felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible during those dark months after the divorce. Chapter 10. The Grace of Letting Go. 5 years passed, in the beautiful chaos of raising 4 children who somehow shared a birthday, but absolutely nothing else about their personalities or interests. River climbed everything remotely climbable and gave Amber daily heart attacks with her fearless approach to physical risk. Sage observed the world with such intense focus that teachers called him gifted and suggested advanced programs. Willow charmed everyone within 5 feet of her existence and collected friends the way some people collected stamps. Forrest argued about everything, with the stubbornness of someone absolutely certain of his opinions, despite being 7 years old. Amber's floral studio had expanded into a space 3 times the original size, employing 2 talented assistants who helped manage the constant flow of orders from brides and event planners who specifically sought out her work. Her arrangements had become known throughout the city for their emotional honesty, for somehow capturing grief or joy or hope in petals and stems, for making people feel seen through flowers. Josiah's landscape architecture had grown steadily through reputation and word of mouth, his designs sought after for their understanding of how beauty and sustainability could coexist. They were comfortable financially, happy in ways that didn't require external validation, building something lasting together. One afternoon in October, Amber stood in her studio arranging flowers for a wedding the next day when a news alert appeared on her phone. Something made her actually read it, instead of dismissing it immediately. David Luca had quietly remarried. Small private ceremony, no guests. A woman named Patricia Morrison, described as a non-profit director in her 40s. No mentions of children or heirs or dynasty building. Just two people choosing each other. The article mentioned briefly that David had stepped back from daily operations of his family business to focus on philanthropic work, specifically a foundation providing counseling services for men dealing with toxic masculinity patterns and generational trauma. That he had become quietly known in certain professional circles for his work helping divorced fathers understand the emotional damage their behavior inflicted on children. Amber showed the article to Josiah that evening while the quadruplets worked on homework at the kitchen table with varying degrees of focus and complaint and creative avoidance. Josiah read it carefully, his expression thoughtful, and looked at her with the unspoken question clear in his eyes. She smiled and shook her head gently. She didn't need to contact David, didn't need to acknowledge his transformation or validate his redemption, didn't need anything from him at all. She hoped he was becoming better, hoped he was breaking patterns that had nearly destroyed them both, hoped he had found some version of peace. But his journey was separate from hers now, parallel lines that would never intersect again. That was enough, more than enough. River interrupted their moment by announcing loudly that she wanted to be a botanist when she grew up. Sage countered immediately that he wanted to design sustainable buildings that used plants as part of the structure. Willow declared with absolute certainty she would be a teacher because she loved helping people learn. Forrest insisted with his characteristic stubbornness that he would be everything simultaneously because choosing one thing was limiting and he refused to be limited. Josiah laughed, the sound filling their kitchen with warmth, and told them they could be whatever they worked hard enough to become, that the world was full of possibilities. Amber added that they could change their minds as many times as they needed, that life was long and people evolved, and the person you were at 7 didn't have to determine the person you became at 17 or 37 or 70. That growth meant allowing yourself to transform. She looked at her 4 impossible children and her imperfect partner, and her messy kitchen filled with the evidence of actually living, and felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes, not gratitude for the suffering that had preceded this moment, but gratitude that suffering hadn't been permanent, that she had survived and chosen to rebuild rather than remain destroyed, that she had become someone capable of joy after learning intimately what devastation felt like. That night, after the children were finally asleep after the usual bedtime negotiations and delays, Amber sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the letter she had written years ago, the one she planned to give her children when they were old enough to understand complexity and nuance and difficult truths. She read it again, making small edits with a pen, adding thoughts that had come with time and perspective and the wisdom that only comes from surviving what shouldn't be survivable. You came from impossibility, she had written in careful script years ago, from 2 broken people who chose to heal together, from a body everyone said couldn't carry life, from a woman told she was fundamentally defective, from circumstances that should have prevented your existence but somehow made it possible instead. She continued reading, her own words bringing tears to her eyes even though she'd written them. Remember this, what people say you can't do, what you inherit, what breaks you, none of it defines what you can become. You get to choose. Every single day, you get to choose. Some people will try to define your worth by narrow measures, by things you cannot control, by their own limitations and fears projected onto you. Do not believe them. You are proof that verdicts can be wrong, that the impossible sometimes happens, that love creates conditions for miracles that cruelty can never produce. Your existence is my vindication and my joy and my proof that survival is worth the cost. She added one final paragraph in fresh ink, her handwriting slightly different now, but still recognizably hers. I never contacted the man who first told me I was broken after I learned he had remarried and was trying to become better. I never acknowledged his transformation or validated his redemption journey. I simply hoped he found what I found, not perfection, but authenticity. Not a life without regret, but a life lived with consciousness and care about the impact of his choices. That hope was my final gift to him, offered not because he deserved it, but because I had become someone capable of hoping that even people who hurt me deeply could find their way to something better. Forgiveness doesn't require contact or relationship. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who hurt you is hope they become better while maintaining complete boundaries that protect your peace. She sealed the letter carefully and placed it back in the fireproof safe where it would wait until her children were old enough to understand complexity, old enough to process difficult truths, old enough to appreciate the full story of where they came from. Then she returned to the kitchen, where Josiah was finishing the dishes, his hands in soapy water, humming something tuneless and content. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was everything she needed. "You okay?" he asked quietly, reading her expression the way he always could. "I'm happy," she said simply, the words carrying weight and truth. Genuinely, completely happy in a way I never imagined possible when I was standing on that bridge. And that feels like the greatest triumph of all. Not that David finally understands what he destroyed, but that I built something so beautiful that his understanding or lack of it doesn't matter anymore. Josiah dried his hands and pulled her close, and they stood together in their kitchen, while the house settled into nighttime quiet around them. "Thank you for choosing me," he said, the words he spoke almost daily, the words that never got old. "Thank you for being someone worth choosing," she replied, her own daily response. They stood there in comfortable silence, two broken people who had found each other and built something whole from their combined fractures, and Amber understood something profound that she wanted to remember always. The cruelest thing David Luca had ever done was not divorcing her, but making her believe for even one moment that she was anything less than worthy of miracles. And the greatest triumph was not that he finally understood his mistake, but that she had stopped needing him to understand anything at all. She had built a life that had nothing to do with proving him wrong and everything to do with choosing joy deliberately, consciously, despite having every reason not to risk her heart again. She had survived the unsurvivable, had thrived when thriving seemed impossible, had created beauty and meaning and love from the ashes of her complete destruction. In the gathering peace of her kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of life actually lived rather than merely survived, Amber Remy Vale understood that she had won, simply by refusing to stay broken, by choosing to grow, by becoming someone who could hold both the memory of devastation and the reality of joy without one destroying the other. Some endings were not happy or sad, she thought. They were just human, just the complicated truth of people learning to be better versions of themselves, sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing, but continuing regardless. She never saw David Luca again, never contacted him, never acknowledged his attempts at redemption beyond that moment at her gate. But in the quiet of her own heart, she hoped he found what she had found, not perfection, but peace, not erasure of the past, but transformation of it, not absence of pain, but the ability to live well despite carrying scars. That hope was her final gift to him, offered freely because she had become someone with enough happiness to spare, someone whose joy was so complete that wishing him well cost her nothing. And then she returned fully to her life, to the homework battles and dinner preparations and bedtime rituals that made up the beautiful mundane reality of raising 4 impossible miracles. To Josiah's hand finding hers while they watched their children play. To the ordinary, extraordinary life she had built from nothing but determination and spite and eventually love. She understood completely, finally, that the greatest revenge was never witnessing his suffering or hearing his apologies or receiving his acknowledgement that she had been right all along. The greatest revenge was simply, beautifully, profoundly being happy without him, living well, loving freely, choosing joy even when joy required courage. That was enough. That was everything. That was the victory that mattered. The end.